Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm going to introduce myself and then turn it over to my co-presenters. I'm Caitlin DeClercq. I'm an assistant director at Columbia University Center for Teaching and Learning, and also one of the co-founders of the Epidemic Urbanism Initiative, which you're going to be hearing about in today's presentation. Mohammad?
Good morning, Mohammad Gharipour. I'm a professor at Morgan State University in Baltimore. It's a pleasure to be here. As Katie mentioned, we'll be talking about the design competition that we organized last year as part of our Epidemic Urbanism initiative. So now I would like to talk more about the history of the Epidemic Urbanism initiative and how the whole thing started. Katie and I were supposed to have a panel on healthy cities in Edinburgh, Scotland, which was scheduled for June 2020. And as most of you know, all of you know, pandemics came, and then we ended up our panel and the whole conference got canceled. So we decided to do something else because we thought that this topic of health and healthy cities is so relevant. That's why we decided to organize an online conference. And it might sound very easy these days. It was not very easy in May 2020. So we organized our first conference, Epidemic Urbanism Reflections on City, Reflections on History. And we ended up actually receiving more than 55 submissions from different countries. So the response was so positive that after this conference, we decided to have another conference and then a third panel on equity and race in architecture. And then we continued this whole initiative. So based on that, we organized a series of conferences, and gradually our community, our epidemic urbanism community, grew over time. So now we have about 1,900 members from 91 countries. So again, as part of our efforts, we ended up publishing a book on epidemic urbanism. You see the cover here. And I'm glad to mention that our colleagues at Epidemic Urbanism, they are also working on another volume, which is on the future of architecture in post-pandemic age. And because actually it was really important for us to give a voice to different communities, we started recruiting liaisons from different countries. And now I'm happy to tell you that we have we have 76, we have 80 liaisons from 76 countries. And we meet with them every 3 months to get ideas and suggestions for future projects. And they are really engaged. And this is mainly because we look at it as an opportunity to work with communities in different countries and scholars and practitioners from different countries, and to to make something that is meaningful and truly interdisciplinary, and not just on the paper. And that's why giving this voice and not having a top-down approach has been our priority in this initiative. So this is our website, epidemicurbanism.com, and you can find all our past conversations on our YouTube page, on our YouTube channel. And you will see that many of these conversations are with experts from other fields: sociology, public health, environmental health, because again, that has been our priority, to engage people who are not normally part of the conversation when it comes to discussions on healthy architecture and healthy cities. And please feel free to join our community so that you get updates on our future activities and you can join our next events.
Thank you so much. So what I'm going to be introducing now is, and of course, the focal point of today's presentation is one of the activities that we were really excited to organize in 2021, which is our design competition. So here's what you can expect from us for the next, let's say, hour or so. We are kind of in the process of introducing first our initiative, and soon you're going to get to hear from our fabulous presenters, which I'm sure you're excited about as well as me. Then Mohammad and I are going to give you all sort of a summary of what this design competition was about, the primary values and goals that drove our work, sort of the moments of innovation that we're particularly proud of with this design competition. And then we're going to hear from our panelists to really get a sense of what some of the outcomes and some of the projects that were produced through this design competition look like. And at the end, we're actually really excited to hear from you all with any feedback or questions you have, because this will be an opportunity to help shape future design competitions that we'll be planning. So please do take note of any questions that you have for that Q&A at the end of our time together today. For now, though, let's hear from our esteemed panelists. I'm wondering maybe if Bud, you'd like to start by introducing yourself? Yeah.
Hello. Okay. Yes, I'm assistant professor, College of Architecture at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. I am also a Bachman professor in health design. My interest is in design health and healthy placemaking. And my prior work with EUI was presenting in a symposium on the future of architecture in the post-COVID age. And I'm really happy to be here and look forward to talking more about the stuff we're doing now.
Hi, everybody. This audience is awesome. So good to see you guys here. This real dedication. My name is Irene Hwang, and I'm assistant chair of architecture at Taubman College at the University of Michigan. And I really have worked in the last few years to dedicate, or longer than the last few years, my work, research, teaching, and service actually focus on converting architecture from a rarefied good and service into a basic human right. And so I really got involved in the Epidemic Urbanism initiative through a longstanding relationship with Professor Gharipour. And we are members of the Equity and Architectural Education Consortium. And that's been a real source of amazing collegial scholarship that I think has led to the really rich kind of projects and initiatives that have come out of these really great friendships and relationships. So thank you for joining our presentation today.
Thank you so much. You'll see that there's also a couple of additional faces on the screen that I'd like to introduce now. Unfortunately, two of our panelists were not able to be with us here today due to the complexities of traveling during this COVID semester. On the very left-hand side of your screen, you see Louisa Iarocci, who is an associate professor in the Department of Architecture at the University of Washington in Seattle. Louisa has been a longtime collaborator with the Epidemic Urbanism Initiative in the 2 short years this initiative has been around. She was a member of our July 2020 symposium entitled Global Visions on Cities and Historical Pandemics in the 20th Century. She then joined us as a moderator in the January symposium on the future of architecture that Bud mentioned, and is also one of our EUI board members. You'll see also the third picture that's Katarina Andjelkovic of the Atelier Andjelkovic studio. She's also an independent researcher in Serbia. As you're going to hear in just a moment, Katarina had a really important role to play in planting the seeds of the idea that ended up growing into this design competition. So more on that in a moment. She also was part of the same January symposium that Bud was part of, and Louisa as well. And she serves as our liaison to Serbia for the Epidemic Urbanism Initiative. So all of this in mind, I hope you can see that one of the things we're most fortunate to enjoy in the Epidemic Urbanism Initiative are fabulous colleagues. This is the thing that makes this work so wonderful, and you get a chance to meet a couple of our colleagues today. So with that, I wanted to turn the mic over to Mohammad, who's going to walk us through what this design competition was all about.
Thank you. So as Caitlin mentioned, we had a conference on the future of architecture and urbanism in the post-COVID age in January 2021, which really went well. And one of the panels that we had was on healthcare design. Part of the conversations that we had as part of this panel was the significance of kind of shifting the dialogue and the paradigm on this topic. And that's why when we met with the members based on the conversations that we had, and specifically a suggestion that we received from Katarina, our liaison from Serbia, we decided to organize our first design competition. So that was a real adventure for us because, I mean, it's a new initiative. We had no experience in organizing any design competition. And for the first time, we were trying to come up with a framework for this design competition. So I'm going to read our mission statement, which is, I think, is very important. The goal of this design competition is to provide a setting for collaboration between students, teachers, designers, thinkers, architects, artists, and practitioners from a range of disciplines and fields in order to create and discuss conceptual design ideas that explicitly promote healthy places for vulnerable communities. And that is actually, why did we focus on vulnerable communities? Because that's a topic that came up during conversations that, we were just so focused talking about the impact of pandemics on cities and architecture that no one was talking about the elderly, the kids, and these vulnerable populations. So that's why we decided to keep our competition focused on this specific topic. And then, and that was mainly based on this idea that we had that there is an urgent need to rethink architecture, urban design, and the built environment in general toward more critical, just, and equitable solutions in the post-pandemic age. And based on so many conversations that we had with our board members and with our community members, we decided to keep the competition focused on 4 different categories. One was senior housing, community clinics, neighborhood schools, and public parks. And you will hear about all these categories later. But obviously, it was a huge this whole project was a huge team project, teamwork for all of us. We are so delighted to have our jury chairs here. Bud and Irene and Louisa and Katarina, who will be presenting later. And for each of these categories we decided to find the right experts and contact them. Diversity in a meaningful way was a priority. Keeping things very global, again, was very important for us. And that's why you can see that we had jurors from different countries, from different areas of expertise, from community planning, urban planning, architecture, a wide range of disciplines. At the same time, we thought that it's not just good to have some jury meetings and announce the results. Anything that we do at Epidemic Urbanism, we try to make it accessible to the public. And that's why we invited some commentators, experts in different categories. And we asked them to make comments on the selected shortlisted projects, as well as the whole kind of selection process, because that part was very important for us. And then make all this material available online.
So we weren't really sure what to expect, right? This was our first design competition, the first activity like this that we've embarked upon as part of this initiative. And we were really thrilled at the response that we received. We got 52 submissions from almost 30 countries across these 4 categories that Mohammad just outlined. As you might remember from the description of what this design competition was all about, we were interested in more than just the objects or the spaces being designed. To us, what was really important was this narrative of place, of the site. What's not just the physical context of the site that participants have chosen, but what's also the social context, the physical context, the political context, et cetera. We wanted participants to be able to describe to us, what is this site? Why is it important? Who are the communities that use the site or who could use this site, who are in need of this site, in other words? What are some unmet health needs that you want to intervene in? Why are those important? So in other words, these submissions were important because they took the form of a narrative slideshow. We asked participants to submit something like 8 to 10 slides as a PDF, as a way to tell us this story, right? To kind of to articulate their ideas in both words and images. We were really excited to see the stories that each of these submissions told. So again, in addition to having these really beautiful designs, each of these submissions sought to first deliberately center their ideas on health, equity, and social justice. So the importance of this narrative that accompanied the various architectural renderings that we received was a chance for participants to really articulate what their intentionality was in terms of how their designs were going to actively participate in promoting health, in centering equity, and in supporting these vulnerable communities. And this was really important. This is something that we're really proud of from the design competition. Additionally, these submissions, it was lovely to see the ways in which they were really trying to articulate and intervene in really broad and diverse definitions of health. So in addition to, of course, articulating how their designs were going to help support vulnerable communities in anticipation of maybe the next epidemic that will visit us, the next global pandemic, or any other crisis to which they'd be particularly vulnerable, we also saw how these projects were also hoping to intervene in community health, in mental health, in physical health. So really this was a celebration of health promotion at sort of many scales and in many dimensions, which I think is something that's really something we should be celebrating in this competition. Submissions were then reviewed by 4 jurors, as Mohammad just outlined, and these juries, of course, had the really difficult task of identifying 3 shortlisted projects. As you're going to see, the projects that we received were just so rich. This was not an easy process, but we'll describe a little bit how we made that, how we made those decisions. And then we invited shortlisted teams to make really brief 2-minute videos that was their chance to sort of share their work at a public scale. We made these videos to share with these public design review meetings that Mohammad talked about earlier. And again, we'll go into a little bit more detail about this in a moment. You'll get to see some of these videos. But again, that was a chance to invite our participants to share their intentionality and what was so important about their site, the communities, and the interventions that they proposed. So as you know, the values that guide our work in the Epidemic Urbanism Initiative were things that we wanted to make sure were centered throughout every part of the process of planning and designing and implementing design competition. And one of the ways that we did that is through the creation of this rubric that helped to guide the jury decisions. So you see the list of the 5 categories that were on our rubric to assess all these projects. And I wanted to just sort of, I guess, illustrate the ways in which we brought these different ideas to life. So first, of course, we were interested in the extent to which different projects were articulating the physical and social context of this site. So again, we weren't just interested in physical dimensions. We really wanted to know who are the communities, what's the local area like, tell us more about the context, right? So we're getting to learn about these communities all across the globe, which was really lovely. The second dimension we were looking for is the extent to which these projects were able to articulate their intentionality with regard to intervening in health, right? So what are the health implications? What are the stakes of this work? How are they sort of framing what the community health needs are? And how are they creating or leveraging different affordances of the site and the design interventions that they are proposing? Third, we were looking for projects to explicitly speak to this idea of equity, inclusion, belonging, also sort of thinking about community health as something that's particularly important during a pandemic or during another sort of public health crisis. So again, we were looking for projects that were successful in articulating these ideas. You'll also see kind of more familiar maybe design competition assessment criteria in our last 2 criteria in here, design innovation and architectural representation. What was important in our take on these different topics was that we could articulate these assessment categories in a way that was maximally accessible. Remember, we were working with a global population here. We wanted to make sure that we weren't just looking for sort of the fanciest graphics, right, or the most exciting objects being designed, but really we were looking for design innovation in a much more nuanced and broad way. Are there really creative, symbolic, or phenomenological, or social, or physical implications that are being articulated here? So again, we really wanted to try to celebrate different types of work and different ways of contributing to these ideas. And finally, of course, we were also interested in architectural representation, but importantly, any images had to be annotated with this narrative, right, to tell us what's the intentionality behind these design moves and what is the kind of desired or envisioned impact. So again, architectural representation had to be framed within this broader context. And finally, and I promise you're going to hear from our fabulous panelists in just a moment here, but I wanted to give you a sense of what these design meetings were all about. So as Mohammad mentioned, it was really important to us that the process by which we were making decisions about the various projects that we were assessing and sort of the criteria for how these were chosen, it was important to us that these were not private conversations, right? That these weren't happening behind closed doors, but rather that we could share these as a public discourse so we can make them accessible as educational educational materials as part of the epidemic urbanism sort of framework. And so in this regard, in these review meetings, of course, we brought together practitioners and academics who comprised the juries. And these were public meetings. So they were convened on Zoom, they were live streamed to our YouTube channel, and they're available on YouTube now. So if you're interested in seeing what these juries talked about, I encourage you to go on our YouTube site and check them out. We've heard from our community members that these have been really valuable educational tools in various studios and architectural courses that they're teaching. So again, it's something I'm particularly proud of for the design competition. In these jury meetings, as you're going to see in just a moment, this was a chance to celebrate successful design strategies sort of across the whole kind of across the whole suite of projects that we received. So this was not just a chance to kind of celebrate the shortlisted projects, although we certainly did that, but this was a chance really for the juries and the jury chairs to say, here are the big ideas that were presented by all of the submissions. Here's what we really appreciated about the different ideas that are being shared at this global scale. This is also a chance, again, sort of the value of having really diverse juries. This was a chance for us to also articulate connections of these different designs that were being proposed to broader questions in the literature. So again, this is a chance for us to sort of take these individual case studies and then really amplify them and connect them to broader insights from the literature. So for example, we were talking about community clinics. What do we know about what's being successful about clinics right now to respond to vulnerable communities during times of crisis? Or what do we know about aging populations and how might these projects help to amplify these ideas or maybe extend our thinking or suggest new ways for us to take our insights? And finally, and I think this is really important, especially the role of the commentators, which you heard about, was to help us amplify different design implications and imperatives. So what can we take from these conversations? What are we learning from the conversations we've had and from these really lovely design proposals? How can we amplify the big ideas for where architecture should go, where we might think about preparing for the next pandemic that's going to visit us? How might we think more critically about what health might look like in these different communities? So again, this is, I think, something that we're particularly proud of as an outcome of our design competition. So with that, I'm sure you all are excited to hear from our panelists, as am I. I know I need a drink of water now. So let me go ahead and turn over the mic to Bud, who will talk to us about the work that he and the juries did for the public parks strand of our competition. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. So yes, so I was in charge of the public parks promoting equitable access to shared space. I guess I got to figure out how to do this. And to start off, as Caitlin was saying, we had a whole host of jurors that were helping within that process, and it was really exciting. And I think she mentioned also they were from very diverse places across the entire world. So what's the understanding of what parks are in those places, and we'd have these robust conversations across many time zones. Sometimes I was in a meeting at like 2 o'clock in the morning and they were in 3 p.m. And so there was a lot of a negotiation within all of that, but it was like super exciting to be part of this. Here we go. So this was March 2020. And so just a little bit of quick background on me. I live in Lincoln, Nebraska, and we were told March 2020 that we were not going to be going back to classes anymore. Like a lot of you probably went through the same process. They closed the doors. On my walk back to my house, I passed this, which was swings had been removed from the park in my neighborhood, and there was fencing put around everything because all of a sudden parks were really scary places. There were places where kids were going to exchange germs. And everyone decided we all needed to be inside, right? We did not want to go outside. We didn't want our kids going outside. We didn't want them going to school. We were going to do everything on Zoom. Obviously, that was not a good idea. And that came about pretty quickly, not only for getting healthy, being outside, but also just from the perspective of interacting with people in kind of a safe place. So for public parks competition, we were looking to counter this idea with a focus on promoting equitable access to shared open spaces. And so, like Caitlin said, all these competition entries came in. These were the entries that eye-opened at one point and was just blown away by the kind of the diversity of how they were thinking about this. Again, I went from seeing this park in my neighborhood that was all shut down to these just really innovative ideas on how we could get people back outside. And really kind of taking advantage of underutilized space. Why is that not going forward? There we go. So I'd like to start talking about space just a little bit, and place. So the thing that I found really interesting about a lot of these proposals was that there were a lot of students that submitted projects that didn't really have a place, or they had places that were contaminated, that weren't very nice. And so there were a handful that were really like saying, okay, we need place. We understand that this, with COVID, that we need to be outside and we need a place where we can meet and enjoy being in the outdoors. And so for me, I thought it was really interesting. And I don't know if you guys can see these images, but there's waste and trash and everything else. And so these ideas of like trying to clean this up and actually create really incredible spaces. And then the other thing was that all the jurors were really interested in was this equitable access to public parks. And it wasn't only, and I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but there's like these little robots in one of these that keep people from getting too close together, controlling like the safety of individuals that might be, say, in a wheelchair or have walkability issues. But then there was also, it wasn't just about the people. They realized we wanted to bring back the flora and fauna. So it was equitable to everything, which was really, really exciting and not expected. And then also these ideas of healthy placemaking. So this particular proposal was on a site that had a pipe, big like oil pipe that kind of meandered all through a site. And nobody really used it except for probably for things that you don't want people using that space for. But this particular student team put together this idea of this ribbon that wrapped all through that. And how could we use that site not only in kind of nice weather, but how can we think about it in terms of, seasonal and still get people out and active and healthy. The other thing, and this gets a little bit to also, I think Caitlin mentioned the kind of graphics and everything, like graphics like this, I'm kind of jumping a little bit here, but the graphics on this particular one, and even the ones that we saw before, I think all the jurors thought we should make a book of just like graphics, because it was so beautiful to see this diversity of approaches to how you might think about place and how they represent those. And so this was the conversations we were having during our meetings. And again, you would have folks from all over and kind of talking about what we were doing and why it was important, really robust conversations that would go on and on and on and never wanted to stop. And we still chat to this day. So for me, it was a really incredible thing to be part of. And especially given that my background where I'm really looking at kind of healthy placemaking. So for me, this was like the perfect project and an inspiring project that these young students came to us with. Thank you.
So now we're going to be hearing from Louisa Iarocci about the community clinics submissions, and Louisa was able to pre-record her contributions today. So we're going to be playing a video where you get to hear what her group was all about.
Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here to have the opportunity to speak on behalf of the community clinics category of the Epidemic Urbanism competition. I served as the jury chair, and the jury who you see here, delighted to speak on their behalf, and was appointed by DeClercq and Mohammad Gharipour. What I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about the background of the competition brief and describe the assessment process, and then introduce 3 shortlisted projects as a mean to highlight some of the lessons that we learned from the process. The entries to the community clinics category of the EUI competition responded to the call for proposals for innovative ideas for the design of a community healthcare facility that could be at any scale or in any location. The competition brief asked the entrants to consider the vital role that these institutions can play in supporting vulnerable, underserved communities, especially during times of crisis. The competition brief was to be for a patient-centered community health center that brings together a range of medical services under one roof in order to serve individuals, families, and children and provide health and wellness outcomes. The proposed design must provide spaces for physical and emotional healing, as well as for education and community outreach for an underserved community. And the task was to consider the public image and visibility of the clinic, as well as its connection to the community. The jury was really impressed with the range and depth of the submissions that came from all over the world and considered a wide range of communities in need of healing, treatment, and prevention. The jury first narrowed the field of 16 projects to 5 and then identified 3 shortlisted projects. The criteria used for the evaluation of the proposed projects began with their relationship to the physical site itself, but also ranged to the social connection that the projects made with their identified community. The jury examined the health implications of the designs and their alignment with the unique needs of their users, and the way the interventions promoted equity, inclusion, and a sense of belonging. Another important consideration was the level of design innovation from the technical to aesthetic, and how well the architectural representation worked in terms of telling the story about the communities that were served. The winner of the project was a trial clinic focused on an underserved, economically vulnerable neighborhood located in Pretoria, South Africa. It was actually located within an existing abandoned stadium that acts as a visual anchor point for the community members, as well as providing a structural framework into which modular units can be slotted. The proposed proposal offers a series of solutions that heals the community and the land, actually proposing links between the land, the culture, and people, incorporating elements like traditional healing gardens, as well as climactic solutions like stormwater collection. The first runner-up was a space for PTSD survivors of conflict in Kashmir, a community clinic for people who have experienced collective trauma caused by violence and conflict. This project moves seamlessly from the close analysis of the specific user in terms of their therapeutic needs to the close analysis and mapping of the conflicted region and the site. The architectural intervention provides dedicated spaces for healing and treatment to people classified according to their unique trauma, but also provided spaces of contemplation and restoration, including gardens, community spaces, and walking trails. The second runner-up was the I Believe Modular Community Healthcare Center, which was a solution to healthcare accessibility in the design of a prefab health structure to serve a remote rural community in India. This flexible modular project can be built in a short time with eco-friendly, affordable materials that incorporate sustainable technologies from solar collection to rainwater filtration. The system is universal for any terrain and can be built in stages to respond to community needs, bringing comfort, well-being, and healthcare awareness to this underserved low-income community. So the jury was really impressed with all the entries to this category of community clinics that featured a wide range of design and thinkers, including students, teachers, practitioners, and researchers, all really passionate and engaged about the topic of health and architecture. Their projects really sought to address the role that architecture can play in the creation of a community-based and patient-directed facility that fulfills the critical task of delivering primary healthcare services to society's most vulnerable individuals and families, and offer and foster a sense of safety, of health, and welfare in a way that is inclusive and welcoming. Thank you.
It is now my pleasure to invite up to the microphone Irene to talk about the neighborhood schools category of submissions.
Oh, cool. Okay, hi everyone. How freezing are we on a scale of like 1 to 10? I'm like at an 11. I feel like we should do some jumping jacks before I get started here because like I literally am so stiff. I don't even know if I can like push the clicker. But thank you all for coming. Before I advance through my slides, I just actually wanted to mention that Mohammad had leaned over to me before starting and was like, you got to mention the global thing, like emphasize the global thing. And I think for me, that's really kind of underscores what I really value in this presentation and in this inquiry and in this whole initiative is this idea that we're able to see global, not as a monolith, not as these kind of generalized large statements or large issues, but through the competition and through the various responses and also the various contributions of the judges and of the organizers, we were really able to understand globalness as a plurality of issues, as a plurality of priorities, and as something that can touch us individually on many different levels and through like many layers. And so I think for me, hopefully that helps to contextualize a little bit the kind of variety that we were able to see throughout the competition. And then I wanted to sort of end this small introduction with really sharing with you why is this initiative interesting to me personally? And, you know, when Mohammad and Caitlin asked me to be a part of this, you know, I'm going to be honest, I was like, I was looking at my schedule and I was really kind of reviewing all of the different pressures and responsibilities that we have as designers and as academics and as people that are contributing to the built environment. And so I think for me, where I found a kind of grounding in this project and in this initiative was to really understand, again, how architecture is not just, in my case, where I'm focused, architecture, the built environment is not just the realm of the elite, right? It's actually for all of us. It is the background, it is the backdrop for the human condition. And so the power of that, you know, that we can see the power of these responses, the power of the different answers and solutions and questions that are coming from around the world and being, you know, consolidated in this initiative is really, to me, powerful. And I really appreciate that. Okay, so getting on to the slides, here we go. I'm going to fast forward, click. Okay, so again, underscoring the global nature. It was so fun meeting Stephanie, Claire, and Melinda during our jury process, because you know, Stephanie was a practicing architect from Germany. Claire was a landscape architect and also academic in the West Coast of the United States. And Melinda was a faculty member and architect in South Africa. And so I think all of this together really helped us have such an interesting and engaging conversation about the projects we saw. And, you know, there's a variety of things. Sometimes you see projects and you're like, I'm not so sure those graphics are really great. Or you're looking at the project idea and you're wondering like, I'm not sure that's so developed. Is that a little bit too slick or is that too perfectly packaged? But in the end, having the other 3 members of the committee and jury to sort of talk through these things, we were really able through the prompts that were prepared by our wonderful leaders, our competition organizers. It really helped us to really understand the different values of each particular project and maybe not judge them on the standard criteria that we've been trained to accept, right? The idea that we need to just value it for its aesthetic value, or we need to value it for its, you know, discursive innovation. So I wanted to just really acknowledge that community. And our process in reviewing the different proposals was we wanted to sort of present it through analysis, the type of engagement and disciplinary assumptions that we had, and also some themes. But that was just kind of the framework. And what I would like to really present is kind of some thoughts that came out of that. So for us, the category of neighborhood schools was really important because we felt like schools were really deeply embedded in a category of design, because they're not only the place for educating our next generation, but they're also the site where many social and community infrastructures can converge. So in the same way that in the States, we have PTA meetings, or I vote at my local middle school, there are just so many kind of civic and social things that come together. I also take tennis lessons at the high school. So again, the kind of infrastructures and things that we build for just schools themselves, and again, I'm speaking from my personal experience in the US context, is something that extends and not only helps to support a variety of interests that we have at the social and civic level, but also help us to understand through this competition what things we can propose to think about in the future. What ways can we address problems globally in their individualized and unique ways. Okay, so in the submissions received in this category, obviously I talked about plurality, but the plurality of functions and that communities can see through their schools was really just vividly illustrated in all the different submissions that we saw. Okay, I think, okay, so here are just some snapshots, and I'll talk through a little bit of them. I'm not asking everyone to focus really deeply on this, but essentially, let me see, I'm looking through my notes, back. Okay, hold on. All right, here, I'm in the right spot. So thank you, iPad. Thank you, Apple technology. Okay, but what we saw was really just such an interest in focusing unique programs for individualized communities and how they could be grafted onto school. So in Puerto Rico, we saw how schools can also support hurricane shelter and hurricane relief. In rural Africa, we saw how new architectural infrastructures could be a laboratory for sustainable construction methods that were actually inspired by vernacular types of construction methods or building methods that were already in the community. We also saw in rural Africa how these community schools could turn into social hubs and what kind of programming language that would require. In Korea, we also saw we saw ideas of connectivity. How can we begin to address connectivity in a really dense urban environment when the pandemic, especially in the COVID era, has really changed our understanding of social connectivity. And again, the school project in Korea proposed different ways to imagine how the school could be a center for that. And then we also saw how in a rural community in Russia, how the community school could seed a place for new cultural activities and new possible programs and community events that hadn't been supported or hadn't had a home before. And then finally in Bangladesh, we saw again how resilience was interpreted by the community. So what are ways that the community school can be thought of to have its playground or to have its public areas be flexible and converted quickly to help address a layered set or a variety of different disasters, but as well as individual kind of needs that change with the season. So this was very, very interesting for us in the jury. And again, you could see the variety of different proposals at the different scales. And again, just emphasizing that it was really interesting to be able to see so many unique and distinct ideas coming together. So finally, I just would like to end with altogether the submissions and the subsequent review and discussion shared the impact and power that decisions about our built environment can hold over the shape and functions of society. And so, you know, grappling with the shaping of our built environment is not just a short-term matter, but it is a really long-term investment for all of us. And these kind of immediate and ongoing takes or attempts to address the sort of systemic and immediate issues we have really can take an infinite number of directions. And that was so fun to see. So thank you all. That was so much longer than 5 minutes, but you know, I wasn't counting. So I hope you weren't either. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Irene. It's now my pleasure. Woo, there we go. Yes, the ultimate iPad pen. I might take that otherwise. So now it's my pleasure to introduce you all to our final jury chair, Katarina Andjelkovic, who's going to talk to us about the senior housing category, the submissions and the process therein. I think, here we go.
PhD and Master Architecture degree. I'm a theorist practicing architect, researcher, and a painter. And as the chair of the senior housing category, I will now provide short notes on the design for health and equity supporting design community competition. This competition was a one-stage process which sought innovative design ideas from the international architecture community for generating urban senior housing proposals in the local community. The design competition was conducted in accordance with the design competition brief and competition conditions. The design competition has set specific focus on places of vulnerability and exposure, as well as on the resources for health, promotion, and intervention. With the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak, vulnerable communities were disproportionately affected, deepening the pre-existing social inequalities, exacerbating existing living conditions, and access to medical care. More specifically, the COVID-19 pandemic exposed significant problems in the design and structure of facilities designed for older adults, also known as senior housing, housing for aging communities, retirement communities, and assisted living facilities. Accordingly, the competition aims were to respond to the urgent need to rethink the way we understand and design space for older adults and to set a new paradigm in senior care by offering design solutions and visions oriented towards a more critical, just, and equitable solutions in the post-pandemic age. During the assessment process, we were guided by the following criteria: physical and social context, health implications, equity and inclusion, and design innovation, and architecture representation. In each of these categories, we were assessing the designs in regards to how they utilize the site in a meaningful way, and how they define needs and resources in the community, as well as the potential of the proposed design to add value and be upgraded in the future. In regard to health implications, we were assessing how interventions meaningfully align with the state's community health needs and resources and explicitly promote public, community, and individual health, including and beyond in times of crisis. We were looking for designs that respond to both pandemic-based health needs as well as broader health or social factors. In addition, we were looking for solutions that promote equity, inclusion, and or belonging, including a sense of community for vulnerable populations and minorities. When the jury met for the first time about many good solutions on how we should approach urban senior housing in local community in the context of health and equity, it became clear that the products we preferred were concerned with a strong sense of the community, those that respond to local needs while addressing crisis-based health issues. These projects did not make us dream away with their strong visionary approach, but encouraged us to believe in sustainable and affordable senior housing models, which at the same time contribute to creating conditions for improving the quality of life for the vulnerable elderly. We were fascinated by the idea that senior housing can help us think more deeply about caring for vulnerable communities around the globe. In Vietnam, Spain, United States, South Africa, and Ukraine in this case. These projects testify to a willingness to promote health across multiple scales in an innovative way. In this regard, many projects address the new normal situation created to the latest COVID-19 pandemic, focusing on the transition zones between the public and private, what is outside, inside, what is accessible, what is not. Addressing these issues has led the majority of authors to deal with the complex interaction and intersection of cultural and natural systems, re-examining how cities and nature are inextricably woven together. These projects have reminded us once again to reread the history, for example, in the SNASH critical historical examinations, which have taught us the deep research on how the histories of disease and the environment intersect to create the potential to contribute to broadening and transforming our understanding of these categories. In a broader perspective, the shift in how we frame the humanities scholarship on cities and nature offers a vital opportunity for us to develop a broader and more inclusive approach to the ways that we study architecture and urban design problems, as well as the global, urban, and environmental issues. Thank you very much.
So now what we wanted to do is take just a couple of minutes to show you some snippets of those 2-minute videos that our shortlisted projects put together. We debated whether it'd be better to show you sort of 1 or 2 projects in their entirety, or if we wanted to kind of give you a sampling, and ultimately we decided to give you a little sampling of some of the really thoughtful and lovely projects that you've just heard about. So now we're going to introduce you to some of the work that was part of our shortlisted projects. Thanks so much for sharing that journey with us. You might have heard us and see us. We were just all so happy to see all those projects again. And personally, I loved seeing people in these spaces, right? I think the first thing you have to do when you're thinking about health and vulnerable communities is to people all these places that we're thinking about. It's now time for our discussion and Q&A, and I want to underscore here this idea of discussion because, first of all, critical to the ethos of our initiative is really this sort of bottom-up conversation that we're always trying to foster. So we see opportunities like these where we get to talk to people to learn more, to sort of inform next steps for our initiative. This is particularly close to our hearts now because due to the positive response of our community as well as our EUI board, we have decided to make this design competition an annual offering, which is very exciting. So coming soon to you all, another design competition. But we would love your feedback, your ideas. We're also looking for collaborators and sponsors. So if any of this is of interest to you, we wanted to just sort of put this screen up during our Q&A time as a reminder to you that we are eager to continue the conversation after this session. So please contact us via email, look at our website. Please use the resources we made available on our YouTube site in your own context. We really see the initiative as being first and foremost this educational hub where everything is accessible and publicly available. So please take advantage of that and let us know what you're using and what you think of the resources. And please, again, feel free to join our EUI community to stay abreast of further events and conversations that we're organizing. So with that, I would love to open it up to Q&A to hear any questions that you all have or any feedback, reactions you'd like to share. Question in the back.
Hey, so thank you for that. Particularly the videos were really, really effective. So I'm curious, and you may have said this, was that student work and professional work, or did y'all have different, did y'all assess those in the same group?
I can address this question. We kind of made it a requirement for the teams to include educators and practitioners and experts from other fields, including public health. So the teams, I mean, most of the teams actually included people from different regions, different parts of the world. For example, the team that submitted their work from Bangladesh, they had members from Europe, they had members from Canada, from I think 4 or 5 different fields and disciplines. So we really wanted to make sure that it's interdisciplinary, but also at the same time, it was very important for us to have students involved in this whole initiative as part of their learning experience. So in general, I can tell you that almost all teams included students and practitioners. Yeah. Okay. Do you have any insights on this? Okay, so I can ask a question.
I actually do have a question. You turn in the other direction, keep turning, no, over here.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right. Yeah, I know. Everybody's always on that side. I was really fascinated by how you made the transparency of the jury and the jury discussion. It's such an outlier and quite frankly, a radical rethinking of design juries, at least historically, right? That go behind closed doors, have their own conversation, and then you just, know the results. And sometimes you just know the results by the naming of first, second, third, or honorable mention. You often don't even get a lot of deep commentary. So I'm just curious, was there resistance to that idea among those who you were asking? Was everyone, I mean, I just like to hear the process behind that thinking, because it is such a wonderful radical rethinking of the notion of the design jury. I'd just love to hear more about that.
I'm going to ask our jury chairs to talk about this.
I love your question and I really appreciate it because I think that was a priority that we had in our group. So I can speak to the community schools because I felt like in so many ways we were benefiting from this really interdisciplinary and also inter-experience level group of submissions. And so I think for me, we were thinking about like schools and we were thinking about, this is a lot of the youngest generation's first glimpse at architecture, first interaction with architecture, first time they're going to decide if architecture is good or if it's bad or if it's a place they want to be or if a place they don't want to be. And the capacity to impact them at that level was so important that because of the variety of submissions that we saw, and some of them were really strong in certain areas and some of them were weaker in certain areas, but we were so so appreciated the fact that these projects, because they came from a global context, challenged us to question our own assumptions about the competition process, that really revealing that and making that the focus of our discussion and the focus of sharing what we learned from the competition. We just felt like that could only benefit the folks that were eventually going to be either inhabitants or beneficiaries or even future benefactors of these different decisions in the built environment. So no, there was no resistance. It came kind of organically, I think, across the different groups because we had been able to have these conversations about the process. And then I also think the setup from the competition itself, there was a lot of back and forth and feedback about what to do at each stage, right? So we had criteria, we also had kind of structure, but again, it wasn't top down and dictated to us, but it gave us a platform to have these discussions and then to feel completely comfortable with sharing them because of the benefit they brought to the discussion. So I hope that helps to answer a little bit.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it and applaud it and just, keep doing it because I think it is important for us to push back on some of the structures we've inherited, as the legacy of the professions. And I really appreciate how you've approached this competition.
Yeah, as Irene mentioned, the educational aspect was really important for us. That I have students kind of submitting their work for these design competitions, and at the end, if they're not winning it, or even if they win it, they don't know why they got the prize, right? So we really wanted it to be a good kind of educational experience, and that's why later from our community members, we heard that they are using these, 90-minute videos as part of their design studios, in order to kind of educate and train their students about what happens behind the scenes, what matters to these jury, and why, they should do things in a certain way, not necessarily when it comes to the aesthetics of architecture, but especially when they are working with communities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for that really hopeful presentation. It strikes me that the projects that you showed were just wonderful projects in general. And I wonder if thinking through the lens of epidemics has opened up new doors for us to think about how all projects should be places of health and well-being. So that's just a comment. I did have a question though about just the context in which students and professionals are submitting these sorts of projects over the last 2 years. And I think it's a little bit unusual that we're all experiencing this pandemic together. And in some ways, it's unusual that we're able to sort of empathize in a way with users of facilities in ways that maybe we always felt like we were outside of it. And that's both great, but also sometimes problematic because we haven't experienced this pandemic the same. We continue to not experience this pandemic the same way. And so I'm wondering in your own process and in the process of the submitters, did you come across people who were reflecting on their ability to actually gain access to how other people were experiencing this across the globe in very diverse ways? And was that even harder because we are so much more removed right now from each other and our ability to travel and get access to communities?
I think this is a fabulous question, mainly because one of the challenges of our competition was that there was not a specific site kind of chosen for all these people. So meaning that Irene, they were reviewing projects from different countries, right? Different sites and different contexts, right? So they had to, first, the jury had to kind of educate themselves and learn about that context before coming up with some comments. So I'm going to just ask Bud or Irene to address this question.
Yeah, I mean, I think I might have said this before, but that was the most exciting part for me, is like seeing these projects from a very diverse areas, diverse teams and everything like that. And then having them like also see that process. So being kind of surprised at all the, the work that had been done in really, really sophisticated ways. I mean, to be honest, like within the kind of the parks that I was looking at, it was incredible that they were making spaces that I would just never would have thought of, and really kind of selling them in a provocative way. And I mean, I don't know that I saw any submissions that were like, there was none that had no kind of warrant. Like they were all just incredible in some way, and kind of opened your eyes to perspectives across the globe on, what this means to have those types of public spaces and how they're used.
I'm just jotting down a note here because I didn't want to sort of say this incorrectly. But I think for me, the experience, and also I think this was shared with our other jurors, was that it was a really generous place, right? We had come together and we didn't agree. I mean, there was a whole a discussion about whether this project should be shortlisted or not. But in that conversation, it was so interesting to be able to come together on this idea of curiosity, or this idea of learning about these different communities, and maybe not having a lived experience of being able to 100% embody that issue that they were bringing up or trying to address. But really, as you were saying, and what you were saying kind of really resonated with me, this idea that there was an optimism in this work, right? And I think that to me really captured the spirit of design and architecture, is that it is about the future. It is about this kind of optimism for how we can make things better. And so tapping into that kind of shared energy was something that was really wonderful. And it really helped us, again, to bridge the gaps that we had where we didn't share that same lived experience, but we could connect emotionally, or we could connect intellectually, or we could connect also through our design ambitions, and then also through educating ourselves, but as well as how this could be a resource for others that were interested in other issues.
Your question also made me think about this caution against sort of universalizing. And I think one of the really lovely lessons that we learned from having sort of not specified a particular site, and kind of being able to learn from the submissions. An example of this is, you might have noticed in the videos you saw for community clinics, not a single one was urban. So our assumption in writing the call was that the need for clinics was going to be urban, because we were writing this from our own context, right? Mohammad and I, in fact, later this afternoon are going to do a presentation on some work we're doing in Baltimore. But it was really important that then the projects made space for articulating where is the actual need. And in these communities, the need was not in an urban setting, but in fact was in these rural communities. And that was what was incredibly compelling about it. So I think something else maybe that I'm learning from this competition is the need to, I think, be humble as organizers, right? And to be open to learning, because I think that's actually where a lot of the big insights about what it means to design for communities and health and vulnerability, I think, were the most profound.
Hi, hey Irene. I missed the beginning, but as a student, I was sort of interested in how these teams are forming, and how are students linking up with professionals to work on projects, and how are they bringing together people from different disciplines? Because I think that's the kind of team that I would aspire to work on. And I was just wondering whether you guys know much about how that happened for the people who entered the competition.
Actually, I may just call it the power of social media. I mean, it's just, I really don't have any idea how they form these teams, because I mean, Katarina and I, we asked the same question in the beginning, but we were really surprised how, I mean, once the call was out, how it was advertised everywhere in all these major kind of design competition websites, architecture websites, and then how these teams were formed. And some of these people had not necessarily worked with each other before, so they were formed to address. But again, we had specific criteria about teams kind of, I mean, as I mentioned, that one of the requirements was having people from different disciplines. And that part was really important for us. But again, that was quite organic. So, I mean, we did not plan that, but it was just very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think like it wasn't out of nowhere, right? So students might have a connection with a faculty who might then have a connection with a practitioner or another thinker or another faculty member. And that was also reflected in the juries themselves. So we were a cohort of 4, and then there was a commentator, but it was, you know, partly through the Epidemic Urbanism network itself, right? But we didn't all know each other, and I may have known I might have been familiar with the work of one of the fellow jurors, but I didn't actually know them. And so it was like under the sort of structure of this competition, where it was almost like an excuse or a reason to get these people together, maybe people you had thought about or people you had you know, seen again in your networks, or maybe were more peripheral. And you know, having something to grip onto was really I think like a catalyst to bring people together. That was my experience.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add to that is as a student, like thinking from a student perspective, it absolutely, a project like this is something to take advantage of. Like think about like who would you want to work with as students, but also other professors or people in the profession. And I would argue that many of them would be really excited to like work on a project like that, like working with young folks, but also you guys getting knowledge from folks that, you know, within the profession itself and within academia.
I think one issue that I want to highlight here is that I think when we came up with the idea and we met with our community members and our board members, we had very limited time and we really wanted to make it happen in a few months. So that's why once we announced it, the teams only had 4 months to submit the projects, which, as you may know, is a very short period of time for design competitions, because now that we are in conversation with other kind of potential kind of partners to organize our next competition, they are telling us that maybe you need to have 1 year so that it becomes a studio project. So the ones that were submitted, the teams did not have the luxury of doing it as part of their studio project. That's actually what makes us more hopeful about the next one.
And just one more observation on this note, Irene reminded me that it's important to emphasize the accessibility of this design competition. So it was completely free to enter. We actually got a lot of emails about this, like, what's the fee? We're like, nothing. Like, all you need to do is just have an email, so you could email us. So we wanted to lower the barrier to entry in that regard, and that was actually really important to us. So anyone with an idea could submit something. And you'll also notice, so we did emphasize, of course, that this collaboration was essential to the ethos of the competition, but you'll notice it was not part of the rubric. And that's actually because we didn't want to disqualify anyone who maybe was coming with a really great idea, wanted to share their ideas for this competition, and yet wasn't already connected to a network. So it was kind of like a soft requirement, but it was not something we disqualified anyone. In fact, I think one of our winners, the gentleman from Vietnam, actually, for senior housing, he was working solo. He's actually an artist who also has an interest in architecture. And how lovely is that, right? So I think, again, those are 2 really important points you want to underscore. It's kind of a variation of the question that you asked. Thank you. Other questions? Do you want to ask a question, Mohammad?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Bod and Irene, was there anything else that made you guys surprised about submissions? I mean, we addressed some of this before, but anything else?
I think what surprised me was that sometimes, and I don't know if this is like TMI, too much information, but sometimes we saw presentations from that were building off of a central idea or a central kind of project, and we saw it manifest across maybe 2 categories. Sometimes we saw similar themes crop up, architectural themes or graphic themes or all of these different things across different categories as well. And that was surprising to me, but also really wonderful, because it just demonstrated the depth of these ideas, but that also that the entrants themselves were thinking about these projects in ways that could their ideas or their solutions could be applied in several different contexts. And that to me was surprising and also interesting.
I guess the only thing I would add to that is this, they had 4 months to work on that. And I found that amazing, the amount of work that they were able to pull off. And obviously some of these teams are pretty big, but even so, like, how do you like collaborate with a group that big and pull off a big idea within 4 months? It's super impressive.
I guess the last question that I might ask is what have we learned? Maybe this is for the whole panel, but what have we learned about maybe how design might better support vulnerable populations, or sort of what have we learned about global health? Any sort of thoughts about the big ideas there? No pressure.
I think I can just say that, I mean, if there was one thing that we learned throughout this competition, and it's probably too obvious, is that the needs of these communities are different. And you need to listen to people. You need to patiently learn about these communities. And that's why even for both of us, it was quite kind of a big lesson. I mean, this is something that we have tried to implement and integrate in the work that we are doing in epidemic urbanism, that we are working with these communities. We need to really learn from them and educate ourselves. That's why, for example, one of the projects that we are currently working on, and we are working actually with the liaisons from 8 countries, they are the ones who are organizing workshops for early career researchers, mainly in developing countries. And these workshops are scheduled for June 11th. And I mean, the topics are amazing because, for example, our liaison from Cameroon, who happens to be a microbiologist, she is organizing a workshop on waste management. But again, waste management for us in the US has a totally different meaning compared to, I mean, to the context of Africa. I mean, I don't know if you have been in Africa, but I mean, I was a Fulbright fellow, I mean, in Senegal, and for 2 months, I was PTSD. I mean, because of the waste. I mean, waste is a huge, huge thing when it comes to some of these contexts. So again, just to wrap it up, I think it's all about these communities. Whether we are working in the context of US, it's very important for us to go there to visit the community, to work with these communities, and whether we are working with these global networks. And there is always something to learn.
Oh, okay. I have more notes. I think for me, it didn't necessarily like bring something new to me, but it really helped reinforce just the potency and the power of design to, complement all of the decisions that we're making all the time, right? So decisions about policy decisions, economic decisions, but also individual and collective decisions. So I think for me, that was what I took from this, and what I learned from this was just a reinforced confidence in the choice of career that I had picked, and the kind of choice of direction that I had chosen, and that it actually resonated across a lot of different people and a lot of different cultures and contexts. And so I really value that.
Yeah, I guess what I would add to that is, in the same way that I think a lot of these groups of students didn't really know each other that well, or they're partnering with other folks, we were the same way. Like, none of us, like, I didn't know any of the people up here on this panel, and there are obviously a lot more people, but like, how do we come up with a really kind of exciting competition? And I think, obviously, kudos to the two of you for running that thing, but like, going from like not knowing anyone to knowing people from all over the globe, which is super exciting, and complement some of the things that you're interested in, and so you're learning from them, they're learning from you, new contacts. Then you have some place to go visit and stay when you go to Bangladesh or somewhere else. So thank you, guys.
Thanks.
I want to be mindful of time. So I think maybe if there's not any more questions, let me just see any last questions for us. We do have one last question for you all, which is, as you know, we are organizing our next design competition. So we invite any suggested topics. What typology should we be looking at? What topics should we be exploring? We would love to hear your ideas. Again, this is how the initiative works, is that we really try to have these conversations and collect as many ideas as possible. I don't know why I'm standing, sorry. I also just want to, as a way to conclude this conversation, I first want to thank our esteemed panelists, so those who could be here today, woohoo, and also those who could not be here today. Also want to thank Mohammad, the best collaborator. We talk every single day and we're doing lots of exciting work together. I want to thank you all for these questions. Again, I think you've given us a lot to think about, so thank you for your attention today. I know it's been a long presentation after. Yeah, we'll all thaw out in a minute. And also wanted to thank our students, Andrew Bui and Caroline McCary, who helped to produce the videos that you saw and are just really supporting this work. So thank you to everyone. And again, we'll be up here if anyone has any ideas to share with us for our next design competition. Thanks so much, everyone. Really appreciate it.